The Misadventures of an Escape Artist, Episode 17. Thrown out of the company? I think not. I was making the return evening flight between Rimouski and the islands. After stopping at Gaspé Airport to pick up a few passengers, I decided, with my co-pilot Jean, to cancel the flight to Magdalen Islands. The weather forecast for the islands was 0-0. This meant a visibility of 0 feet ahead and 0 feet of vision towards the sky. The islands were caught in a fog from the sea. The weather forecast confirmed fog for the next 6 hours. I contacted the operations manager of the company to explain the situation. Mr. Quinn replied, "You must return to the islands immediately. I want the plane back here tonight for tomorrow morning's flights." I continued explaining my position. Finally, the operations manager said, "Loa, I'm throwing you out of the company." I told him I would fly the plane and passengers back to the islands the next morning as soon as the weather was suitable for flight. When I arrived on the Magdalen Islands, the operations manager had changed his mind and told me that I would not lose my job. I continued to fly for the company until it closed down a few months later. I then returned to my life in Montreal, where I would start a small aviation company. My own boss, Alliance Nord-Sud. In June 1994, I formed the airline company Alliance Nord-Sud. I managed it with one of my pilot friends, Mark Goman. I was then 34 years old. During the first days of that adventure, I was still working as a pilot for Air Magdalen. The idea of forming an airline company had been on my mind for several years. And with the help of my mentor, Pierre Perron, another dream came true. This man had a background in actuarial science. He was the head of a large consulting firm in labor relations and occupational health and safety issues. I called him my mentor because Pierre Perron gave me the best business advice. Because of Pierre, I was able to obtain a $50,000 loan to start my first airline company. His presence was enough for the banker to approve the loan. A few years later, I was able to obtain $1.5 million from a notary millionaire to purchase a small business jet. Having successfully secured my loan, my partner Mark and I were able to formulate business plans and prepare the necessary documents to operate an airline company in Canada. It required a lot of work to prepare documents such as the operating manuals, the SOP or standard operating procedures, and the maintenance manuals for the aircraft that we wanted to operate. We had to get help from 2 Transport Canada inspectors who were paid several thousands of dollars to get our operating license, which we finally obtained in 1995. As president and CEO of Aviation Nord-Sud, I was working on several projects in Quebec, Africa, and Haiti. I had to do odd jobs in my surrounding areas to make a living, since unfortunately my company could not yet pay me a salary. At one point, I was asked if I could redo the entire electrical system in the large basement of a house in the west end of Montreal. I said, of course I can do the job. In the past, I had installed alarm systems for my father's alarm company. My electrical experience was limited to that. That evening, I bought myself a book with lots of pictures about installing 120 and 220 volt electrical systems. I brushed up on my knowledge of electricity in the pages of Electricity for Dummies and became a qualified electrician. My partner Mark had a lot of success with the elderly people in the area. He would find endless part-time work. There were always small jobs to be done: installing a shelf on a bedroom wall, changing a light bulb on the ceiling, unplugging a toilet drain. They were simple and easy jobs, but almost impossible for an elderly person to do. Mark always spent a lot of time talking and listening to his elderly clients, especially the ladies. Hospital aeroplane for Southern Africa and a project for Haiti. One of our first projects at ANS was a hospital airline. It was to be used in Southern Africa. It was well known that the African continent was peppered with several regions that were poorly served by roads or regional aircraft. Therefore, many parts of Africa could not easily find solutions to health problems. Mark and I proposed the purchase of a Twin Otter aircraft. The Twin Otter is a Canadian plane, a short takeoff and landing aircraft with remarkable off-road performance characteristics that could land and take off in less than 290 meters. This aircraft would provide a mobile field hospital delivering vaccinations, small surgeries, and neonatal care. We had put a lot of effort into selling our project to countries and humanitarians, but to no avail. Our budget could not sustain the project, and we had to move on. In 1995, our small company was awarded a contract with the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, a UN agency based in New York. We were awarded $5,000 per week to travel to Haiti and study airport facilities. We travelled throughout the country to study and analyse the runways and buildings of the different regional airports. We calculated the costs necessary to bring the country's airports up to internationally acceptable standards. It was a very needed project for the country. The rehabilitation work would be immensely expensive, but the benefits for the local population would have been significant and extremely useful. This was another project that the United Nations put on a shelf. The little twin engine based in Montreal. In early 1996, Mark and I were able to acquire a PA-31 Navajo aircraft that we offered with its crew to Canadian companies wishing to travel in eastern Canada and the northeastern United States. We used this aircraft, which was owned by a Montreal industrialist, for flights from February to the end of December 1996. At first, the owner of the aircraft refused to rent to us. His wife was afraid that we would end up dirtying the carpets and the passenger seats. As you might remember, I had already flown this type of plane with Air Armour a few years earlier. We decided to buy carpets and cover the original ones. When the owner's wife saw our carpeting system, she agreed to rent us the aircraft. Since it was a private plane, we had to have it approved by Transport Canada, spending many thousands of dollars that we did not have. We were 2 regular captains, but on occasion we hired 3 part-time co-pilots we had in reserve. This aircraft could be flown with only 1 pilot. However, the passengers did not like this arrangement, so Mark or I always flew the aircraft with a co-pilot. Would the real co-pilot please stand up? In July 1996, we obtained a contract to transport the 2 owners of a large cement plant, Cement Saran, a major company, from Montreal to the airport in Albany, the capital of the state of New York. Normally, these 2 business owners never flew in the same plane, so that in the event of an accident, one of them would remain in control of the company. But for some reason that morning, they had decided to take the same flight. The plane was to leave at 8 a.m., but due to bad luck, neither Mark nor any of the co-pilots were available to make the flight that morning. Rather than lose the contract and the important client, I asked my girlfriend Lisa if she would be prepared to be a professional pilot and accompany me on the flight. I dressed her up in one of my old pilot uniforms that looked fabulous on her. Lisa had never sat in a cockpit before, so we arrived at the airport early in order for me to point out several things to her so that our passengers would not suspect anything. I asked her to sit on the right in the co-pilot seat. I explained a bit about the instruments, such as the altimeter and the speedometer. I showed her how to hold her hands on the controls in front to make it look like she was flying the plane. I also showed her how to get in and out of the pilot seat correctly, but most importantly, how to open and close the back door of the plane, through which passengers and pilots enter and exit. When passengers arrive, the co-pilot is the one who offers them a seat and explains the safety instructions. As captain, I remained in my pilot seat preparing the cockpit of the aircraft to start the engine, taxi to the runway and take off. After prepping the aircraft and getting my new co-pilot ready for her job, we returned to the passenger waiting room. I took the opportunity to review the weather forecast for departure, flight and destination. It was a beautiful day with no wind or clouds from Montreal to our destination Albany. My only concern was that Albany Airport was without horizontal and vertical visibility in the morning fog. According to the latest airport forecast, the fog was expected to lift within the next hour, and the rest of the day promised to be a cloudless, sunny sky, a beautiful day for flying. When our VIPs arrived, I introduced myself and my co-pilot, and we all made our way to the plane. I continued to the pilot seat to prepare for the flight, while Lisa looked after our 2 important passengers. She explained the security measures, closed the door of the plane, and returned to sit in the co-pilot seat. I started the engines, contacted ground control, and taxied to the runway. My co-pilot Lisa turned to the passengers from time to time and gave them a thumbs up as a sign that everything was going well. We took off and headed towards Albany through a turbulence-free, cloudless sky. It was a perfect flight. As we approached Albany, we saw that the fog had not yet lifted from the airport area, contrary to what had been predicted in the aeronautical forecast. I nevertheless flew on an instrument approach to the runway. We were making a precision ILS approach, which allowed us to descend to 200 feet off the ground on short final. We were in the fog for the last 6 miles on long final before the runway. The passengers were beginning to twitch and become more and more nervous. I was focused on my approach to the airstrip. When we reached 200 feet off the ground, I was still in the cloud and couldn't see the runway. I had to abort the approach and landing. I had to overshoot, which meant increasing engine power and climbing as if I was taking off. I headed back up north to our alternative airport at Plattsburgh, a 30-minute flight from Albany. I really needed to pee. The idea of not being able to see the inside of a bathroom for another 45 minutes was unthinkable. Fortunately, there was an empty bottle of water, which Lisa handed over to me, so I could pee in it. One of the passengers saw the bottle of my urine and asked if it was apple juice. I replied, "It was 2 hours ago." While we were climbing, the Albany air traffic controller radioed me that the visibility at the beginning of the other runway seemed to be somewhat better than the rest of the airport. He could offer an approach on this other landing strip. This other runway was the same runway but approached from the other direction. We would maintain a heading of 190 degrees north instead of a heading of 010 degrees south. I agreed to the change, hoping to see the runway and finally land. The 2 passengers seemed ready to pass out from fear, even though it had been a calm flight and at no time had the plane been in danger. As we started our second approach to Albany Airport, I lowered the landing gear. At 500 feet above the ground level, we were still in thick fog. Finally, at 200 feet, I saw the runway in front of us. I had just enough time to do the flare, which is pitching the nose up, and we landed smoothly. We then headed for the private aircraft parking area. Our 2 passengers couldn't thank us enough. They both seemed to be very impressed by Lisa's talent as a co-pilot. They left the airport for their appointments and specified the mid-afternoon time for our wheels-up return to Montreal. Lisa and I then left the airport for a nearby shopping mall, for a walk and a nice lunch. A few years later, my new co-pilot would become my wife and the mother of my 2 children. My last flight as a pilot on my Navajo PA-31 was at the end of December 1996. The following month, I was working as a consultant on a Cheyenne Piper PA-42 for Sky Service, a major Canadian charter airline.